Biden appeals to the United States Supreme Court. He got obliterated in various locations around this country when he tried to cram down our gullets, the student loan program. Many courts have said that's unconstitutional. You don't have authority to do that. There's no power in the executive branch to do that, but they did it anyways. And now, since they've lost in multiple circuit courts, we're going to check in with their recent filing at the United States Supreme Court. The Biden administration asking SCOTUS to reverse the lower level court so that the student loan bill, or it wasn't a bill, the student loan executive order gets passed so that they can continue on with wrecking the rest of the country. But remember, we saw that the power of the presidency does not include the ability to cancel loans. Nancy Pelosi communicated this to us some time ago. People have been asking Congress for a long time, can you please cancel our loans? If you can't do it, can the president do it? Can Biden just do this, Nancy?
People think that the president of the United States, is this more on the subject than you ever want to know? Will you let me know? People think that the president of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress.
Oh, but it wasn't an act of Congress. This was an executive order that was signed by Joe Biden. He just decided to pass it. And even though it has been found illegal by various other courts around the country, the Biden administration still says that those loans are being processed. Here on CNN is the Biden people or reporters telling us that even though the courts have stopped this student loan forgiveness program, the Biden administration is still processing these.
Well, the Biden administration isn't letting legal challenges stop them from letting people know they're approved for student debt relief. The Education Department is just starting to notify applicants that their requests have been approved, with one important caveat: they can't actually give them the money because lawsuits. CNN's Jeremy Diamond joins us now. Jeremy, you've got a feel for people. They applied for this relief. They're told they're going to get it, but they can't because it's all tied up in the courts. So how is the administration handling this?
So in other words, they were lied to, right? That's what that means. Okay, these people were told. Who told them? It wasn't like they went outside and they found a random letter on the ground. Oh, I wonder where this came from. I guess I'll believe it. No, this was intentional. There was an entire plan around this. The administration, the Biden administration told them this very specifically. It didn't happen naturally, organically.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Paul. A lot of people in limbo right now. You may remember that a whopping 26 million people applied for the student debt relief. And beginning yesterday, the Department of Education began notifying the roughly 16 million people who were approved for this student debt forgiveness program. But in that same letter, they also let those people know that they aren't going to be able to approve those funds as of yet while these challenges play out. The Secretary of Education in this letter to folks who he's notifying says, quote, unfortunately, a number of lawsuits have been filed challenging the program, which have blocked our ability to discharge your debt at present. We believe strongly that the lawsuits are meritless and the Department of Justice has appealed on our behalf.
They have, right? That's the Supreme Court filing that we're going to read here in a minute. But meritless, what are you crazy? I mean, multiple courts around this country have decided that this is an unconstitutional thing that you did. And as a recap, right, they used this as this is a COVID emergency plot.
He goes on to say that the Department of Education will discharge the approved debt if and when we prevail in court. That is, of course, the big question right now, because earlier in the week, we saw the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals issue a nationwide injunction against the program. The Biden administration on Friday asking the Supreme Court to allow the program to go into effect while those legal challenges play out. The other question that remains is whether or not President Biden is going to decide to extend that moratorium on student loan repayments. You may recall that payment freeze, which has been in effect throughout the COVID pandemic, it was set to end on January 1st, coinciding with this student debt program. The White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, on Friday saying only that the president is examining all potential options, but the White House really putting the onus on those Republican-led states that have been pushing to sue and to end this program.
They're suing because it's unconstitutional. And so you can see how this whole narrative is being generated. Republicans are bad. Biden wanted to give you that money, but the Republicans are suing. And the Republican Supreme Court, when they deny cert or when they rule against us, it's going to be those dang Republicans, those 6 conservatives on there who took away your money. And it's going to be that whole saga again, because everything that this administration does is overtly political, even when it is something that is obvious. I think every constitutional scholar, everybody who's looked at this, said the executive, even Nancy Pelosi says there is no ability to have the president do what he did, and he did it. So we'll check in with Karine Jean-Pierre. Then we're going to read the entire, not the entire brief, but we'll read a big portion of it right after we check in with our friends at Goldco. If you've got a 401k, an IRA, or a savings account, you know as well as I do that things are scary out there. The Biden administration has already printed more money in the past 2 years than the previous 100 years combined. National debt, record 30 trillion. Inflation's the highest we've seen since 1982. It's only a matter of time until the house of cards comes crashing down. If you have retirement savings, your money could be at serious risk. Talk to my friends at Goldco. See how you can protect your retirement in gold and silver before it's too late. Go to robertlikesgold.com. They'll give you $10,000 or more in free silver when you open a qualifying account. That's over at robertlikesgold.com. Amazing company, A+ rated with the Better Business Bureau, and we all love gold, especially at robertlikesgold.com. All right. And so now, my friends, we have to ask ourselves about inflation because, as we know, we are going to go Thanksgiving shopping and it's going to be very expensive out there. Hey, Karine Jean-Pierre, this student loan ordeal that you're cramming through, is this going to have any impact on inflation for us?
Loans. Has the administration analyzed any potential inflationary effects of student loan forgiveness?
By making those comments is kind of connected to what the federal officials.
Okay, full-blown stop. Okay. Nothing to do with the Fed.
Well, that's the way you asked the question, so that's the way I was answering the question.
Inflation.
Analyze any potential inflationary effects of student loan forgiveness, the plan that the administration has enacted.
It's a good question that you're asking, but look,
it is a good question.
The president has always. I don't have any data to share with you on that particular question, but the president has been very clear. He wants to make sure that he's lowering cost for the American people. He feels that the student debt relief, especially as we were talking about lifting the pause at the end of this year, he wanted to make sure that he was giving those families, those American middle-class families, a little bit of a breathing room.
Okay, so he's actually not going to lower costs at all, right? He's just going to increase money that they get for free to reduce their already paid for expenditures. But he's not reducing costs for anything coming in. Right? I think that's part of the problem. It's like, are we going to solve this thing or not? Like, is the student loan problem going to continue to grow? Like, are students going to continue to be buried in debt that they can't repay? Or what's the deal? Well, they don't really have much answers for us. No idea on whether it impacts inflation or not. The White House is just totally clueless. It sounds good. They want it done. The actual consequences that might exist in reality, be damned. Nobody cares about those. Okay, so let's take a look now with all of that backdrop at the actual student loan filing. You can see the Biden administration files in the Supreme Court of the United States, Joe Biden versus the state of Nebraska. Application to vacate the judgment from the lower level court at the 8th Circuit. Remember that the states have sued the Biden administration. There's several different lawsuits. Now we are at the Supreme Court. The parties, of course, Joe Biden, President of the United States. The respondents are the states, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, South Carolina. We've got these other 2 cases that we've been following along, Nebraska versus Biden. And here's what they say. They say, pursuant to the rules, we are here in front of you, Supreme Court. Let's begin. They write, Congress charged the Secretary of Education, who's Miguel Cardona, with administering the federal student loan programs. Because borrowers who default their student loans face severe financial consequences, including wage garnishment, credit damage, and other things, they say that Congress specifically gave the Secretary of Education permission to waive or to do things that ensure borrowers who are affected by a national emergency are not worse off in relation to their loans. And they cite this law for us, the HEROES Act, in the U.S. Code. And so they say that's the basis, right? That's why they have the ability to do all this stuff. They write, confronted with the deadliest pandemic in the nation's history, which has wreaked global economic havoc. Did the pandemic do that, or did you guys do that? Both the Trump and the Biden administrations invoked the HEROES Act to pause repayment obligations and suspend interest accrual on all federal loans since 2020. That's different than waiving federal loans. Okay. The pause is estimated to have cost the government more than $100 billion. Of course, but they don't care. Lock everything down, waive everything anyways. Nobody cares. It's just money. In August 2022, Biden's in charge, the Secretary, Miguel Cardona, determined that across-the-board pause on all payments for all borrowers should come to an end. We have to stop all of that. And directed the department to restart loan payments at the end of the year. But the Secretary, Miguel, also found that when repayment obligations resume, lower income borrowers will be at a heightened risk of delinquency and default because of the continuing economic consequences of the pandemic. The Secretary thus directed the department to issue up to $10,000 in student loan relief for people with annual incomes under $125,000, those very poor people. Yes. The lower income borrowers who make less than $125,000. They're going to be hit pretty hard. Yeah. Okay. So qualifying Pell Grant recipients who are at greater risk of default, they get $20,000. Okay. This relief, the Secretary found, is necessary to ensure the delinquency and default rates would not spike above pre-pandemic levels. Now, respondents are a group of 6 states that challenged our plan, those pesky states suing us. The district court dismissed their suit because they didn't have standing, but the 8th Circuit granted their request for a universal injunction pending appeal. And so we're going to see there's a standing argument in here that we're going to skip through. Standing, of course, we've covered this. I can't even tell you how much back after the election. Basically, every lawsuit was a standing lawsuit. I can't take it anymore. But it's the idea that, you can't even bring a suit. You don't even have the ability to sue because you don't have standing. You don't have a proper claim, right? It's like if you if somebody was injured in an accident and you're suing for damages, but you weren't in the accident, why should you be compensated for anything? It's not your claim. You don't have standing to file a lawsuit against the other driver. You weren't even there that day. You were in the Bahamas. So there's no basis for that. Same thing here. Why are you even suing us? You don't have the authority to sue us. You have no standing. So that has been rectified in the 8th Circuit. The 8th Circuit said, no, they've got standing. Leave it alone. In so doing, they say the court did not analyze the merits of the claim. The court's discussion of the merits only included the following statement, which is very brief. It says the merits of the appeal has substantial questions of law that remain to be resolved. So they say this analysis is not appropriate. In other words, Supreme Court, and therefore don't allow this injunction to take place. The injunction, which is what's stopping Biden's loan program from going into effect. Basically, don't write the checks, right? They basically have the checks ready to go in the mail, and they're asking for permission to do that. They say this court should vacate that injunction, which is stopping the mailing of the checks. Respondents lack standing, and on the merits, the states don't have any ability to challenge this. They say the plan falls directly within the Secretary's authority. The entire purpose of this act is to deal with the national emergency, and we're dealing with a national emergency, is what they say. They say the 8th Circuit erroneous injunction now leaves millions in limbo, vulnerable borrowers who might be put in a very bad position. Yeah, what's shocking about that is that they did that. Who created this status of limbo? They could have passed this through Congress easily. They had both houses. Now they don't. Saying that now these people are uncertain about their debt and unable to make that financial decision. Yeah, because they promised something that didn't come to fruition. Maybe they shouldn't have done that. If this court declines to vacate the injunction, a lot of people are going to be in a lot of pain. Okay. I don't doubt that. I actually believe that. I bet that people, honestly, went out, started paying down bills, took, money that they didn't have and applied it to certain things that they didn't need or that they shouldn't have paid off at the moment, because this is not ever anything that's gone through. So the people, right, are going to turn their focus, turn their ire towards the Republicans when really the Democrats put them in this position in the first place. They give us some background. They say that the Education Act gives the Secretary of Education some powers, right? He has the powers to do certain things. For example, a few months after 9/11, after the terrorist attacks, the secretary was provided with certain abilities, declared a national emergency, waived or modified some loans. In 2003, Congress expanded that, said that they could waive or modify statutory loans and put in some different objectives. The HEROES Act was set to expire in 2005, but it didn't. In March 2020, President Trump declared a national emergency. In fact, that was the start of the show, March 2020, the birth date of Watching the Watchers. Proclamation was issued. The declaration remains in effect. The government has declared all 50 states to be disaster areas. Pandemic also inflicted severe economic harms and so on. In response, the federal government provided substantial relief to borrowers with department-held loans, saying that we're going to pause repayment and all of the interest will start being accrued or delayed. But then we fast forward. In August 2022, Secretary Cardona from the Department of Education, he determined that despite all of those measures, despite years of delayed repayment, any resumption of repayment obligations would put many lower income borrowers, the 125,000 a year people, at heightened risk of loan delinquency due to the pandemic. The secretary adopted a two-prong approach. He announced that he would extend the pause one final time through December 31st. And to ensure that borrowers are not in a worse position to repay their loans, saying that up to $10,000 is going to be just given away to people who make less than $125,000. As explained in the supporting analysis on which Secretary Cardona relied, they write, this relief will mitigate the pandemic's adverse economic effects and significantly reduce delinquency and default rates for those affected by the pandemic, which was interesting. I never applied for this or did anything, in this regard, but did they means test? Like, did they ask you, like certain qualifying questions? Like, are these people who are getting this money actually impacted by the pandemic? Or like, did some of these people work at Zoom or something, like got jobs, promotions, raises, all of it, I don't know. Or do you just get $10,000 blank check just by applying? I think it's the latter, right? I don't think they're like means testing or doing anything like this. So it's actually speculating that they're among those most affected by the pandemic. But I would guess that there's probably a bigger subclass of people who are more impacted. Probably less than half of that, right? Cut that number in half and see maybe if you can help those people first. I don't know. But who knows? Okay, the department analyzed its past experience with borrowers who transitioned back to repayment after long periods of forbearance. Indeed, default rates increased 20-fold after the periods of non-payment. It's going to happen anyways. The department reviewed borrower surveys. They did face-to-face conversations. They say that there's a stark increase in the number of borrowers that anticipate difficulty making loan payments. Yeah, it's not going to be good. Acute inflationary pressures on households. The department also emphasized substantial penalties imposed on borrowers who default. Yeah, when these student loans, when they flip this switch back on, when they say everybody's got to start paying again, it's not going to be pretty. The department explained that the contemplated debt relief would ameliorate these harms. The department surveyed economic data, said anybody with less than $125,000, especially Pell Grants, they're going to be really hit hard. And so I guess $10,000 is going to mitigate that risk. We'll see. Now, there were a bunch of proceedings that took place below. Of course, we'll fast forward through all of this. October 20th, prior standing arguments here. A lot of this is procedural history, so we'll fast forward through all of that. We get to some argument and we see some law. So we'll fast forward through some of the law. Let's hit the highlights here. Okay, this is the standing portion of the lawsuit, right? They say this is the federal government. This is Biden saying the states don't have standing. And as we've talked about, this is one of the most, obnoxious parts of the law. Oftentimes, they say that there's basically no direct harm to the state of Missouri because it's representing an entity. The entity really has standing and so on and so forth. So we're going to fast forward through that. This is the area that sort of goes directly to the constitutional law that I think is most interesting here. It's whether or not Miguel Cardona, whether his action in saying, I have the power. Okay, yes, Donald Trump delayed the student loans. Let's say we just take that issue out. Okay, all presidents have the ability to delay the loans. National emergency, they're not due, postpone them for whatever. Let's just say we all agree on that, just so we can take it out of the conversation. Well, there's still this new power that they wrote in there that says that they can just go now give people $10,000 for you, $20,000 for you, depending on what type of loan you have. Where'd that power come from? Where did that constitutional authority emerge? Let's find out. They say that the states are arguing that Miguel Cardona's plan exceeds his statutory authority and it's arbitrary and capricious. In other words, the law is written in law, it's codified, and he's operating outside of the law. They say without addressing either contention in substance, the Court of Appeals issued an injunction, but neither contention is persuasive. They're saying, okay, listen, they made their arguments, the Court of Appeals made their arguments, and forget all that. Let us tell you, Supreme Court, what's really up here. They write, okay, the HEROES Act, notwithstanding any other provision of the law, it says it right, and they're quoting the law. It says the secretary may, quote, respond to national emergencies as the secretary deems necessary. See that? Necessary. To ensure that any affected individuals are not placed in a worse position financially. And they went through the law and they picked out all the sentences that most made sense for them. And they said, oh, look, it's right here. So it's like if you went through like a full book and you just picked out like the couple sentences that made your argument. And you're like, yeah, that's beautiful. That's basically what they did. They wrote, notwithstanding any other provision of the law, secretary may respond to a national emergency as the secretary deems necessary to ensure, whatever that means, that nobody's placed in a worse position financially. Therefore, we've got the authority to do this. And then they say, there you go, it's right there. Look at this. Look at this, court. It's right there. It's plain as day. And they say, obviously, COVID was a national emergency. And they say all student loan borrowers are, quote, affected individuals. And also, they reside or employed in the 50 states, which we have authority over. And the Secretary Miguel, he deemed, you see that, deemed that the lower income people needed this provision. And the act gives us power to do all of it. He said that he deemed that the borrowers were at a particularly high rate of delinquency. And so that's it. That's all we need. Now, he says that the respondents, the states, have asserted that the plan is trying to put these borrowers in a better position, right? They actually have sort of a windfall. And they say, no, that's not true. Okay, well, it's a national emergency. Here it's a COVID-19 pandemic. They say the evidence before the secretary showed that borrowers with individual incomes less than $125K or households below $250K face the highest risk of delinquency and default. Now, the states have responded that the HEROES Act is supposed to be temporary and that all of these other solutions are permanent. Previous invocations of the HEROES Act also had substantial economic effects. They're saying, hey, Trump did some of this too. Trump didn't grant everybody a waiver or cancel $10,000 or $20,000, but he did give them financial benefits. And so we're doing that just a little bit harder than he did. They say previously the federal government spent a ton of money on this stuff, something like, reducing borrower money from $300 to $200 a month, income-based repayments, conversations taking place, and that previous invocations have afforded relief on a class-wide basis. Okay, this is the other sort of constitutional question that we have. Why 125,000 people? A blanket application to everybody? Like, shouldn't it be more of a direct sort of subjective analysis? I mean, what if somebody's making $125,000 a year at like, they had like almost no expenses, right? Let's say for, whatever the situation is, but you have another person who's making $125,000 a year, who's dead broke, right? And living in a high cost of living area or whatever. Both of them should get 10,000, right? And then you start to say, okay, well, I guess if you means test that, then why wouldn't you mean test the whole thing? And then now somebody's getting privileges that somebody else isn't getting. And so now you run into also like equal protection of the law issues. Okay, this crap is messy, which is why we don't do it. But here, respondents have invoked 4 major questions saying the states are trying to fight back against all of this. Let's fast forward a little bit through their arguments. They're also communicating saying that Miguel Cardona, who is the person who sort of rewrote this according to his own mind, they're saying that he says it's not arbitrary, it's not capricious. And they give us some examples of prior examples where Secretary of Education has found in prior, historical context that this stuff is appropriate. Says that an agency does not need to consider every alternative through the conceivable mind of man. Okay, he doesn't have to come up with every other solution. This is a good enough solution. And they say that's about all they need. They're also responding to the Eighth Circuit. They're saying the lower level court was overbroad. They shouldn't have allowed the injunction to stay. And they're responding to the Eighth Circuit here. So let's fast forward through the rest of this. In conclusion, the Biden administration at the Supreme Court, they say, this court should vacate or at a minimum narrow the injunction pending appeal that was entered by the lower level court. If, however, the court declines to vacate the injunction, it may wish to construe this application as a petition for a writ of certiorari. Before judgment, grant the petition and set this case for an expedited briefing and argument this term. Signed by Elizabeth B. Prelogard, Solicitor General for the United States, November 22nd, 2022, going up to the United States Supreme Court. And so she's basically saying either reverse this injunction and allow us to send out the checks, to mail out the student loan checks, or allow us to brief this more fully for you. So if you're not going to sort of give us the order that we want, consider this an actual petition for a writ of certiorari so that we can brief this more fully. And we'll see what the court does. We'll be waiting for the United States Supreme Court to respond to this. I mean, they could come back and grant it and vacate the injunction. If they come back and they say yes on this, you can imagine that those checks are going to be flying out of the Department of Treasury before they can claw those back. That's really what they want. They want to get that money out, because once it's out, you're not going to be able to get it back. So that is the latest on the Biden appeal on the student loan saga. And so we'll continue to cover that one, of course. And I appreciate you subscribing and liking this video wherever it is you're watching this so that we can see you on the next one.